All right. So, imposter syndrome, what is it? So before we kind of get into it, just curious, has anyone in this group of amazing students and individuals, have you ever felt like someone might discover the real you? Like someone might find out, I actually know who they are. They don't belong in this space. Has anyone, you can either say yes, show a hand, put it in the chat. Has anyone kind of had that lingering feeling?
We're getting some thumbs up.
Thumbs up. All right. And if you kind of don't really know what we're talking about or what this means, totally okay. That's what we're going to talk about.
Oh, I'm seeing some other thumbs up.
Yes, it's a very real thing, and it happens to so many of us.
I know Natasha and I have some examples of times that we remember really feeling this way. For me, I felt this. I remember it was my first day of grad school. It had been almost 4 years since I graduated college. And my first day of grad school, I was in career counseling. I remember exactly where I was sitting, and I was pretty excited. And then we got the syllabus. It was my first syllabus of grad school. We were sitting there, we're talking about what we're going to be learning. And I just felt this whole feeling rush over me of like embarrassment. Like, what am I doing here? How I don't think I'm like smart enough to be in here. Like someone's gonna find out that I'm an imposter in this moment. But I remember just the feeling of, it felt like embarrassment rushing over me of being like, oh gosh, do I really belong here?
Yeah, and for me, so in my undergrad, I attended a really small school, but I was a Division I softball player. And for those of you who may not be familiar, in the NCAA collegiate athletics, there are 3 different tiers. Division I is kind of the top tier, Division II and Division III. A lot of that has to do with size, but it also has to do with level of competition. So Division I is the highest level of competition that you can play in a college sport. And I was recruited to play for a Division I school. I always struggled with this feeling of, I'm not meant to be here. I don't belong in this same group of athletes. But if you look at what I did, I spent my whole life playing softball, playing on some of the most elite teams and clubs. So I had all of this evidence that should, in theory, make me feel like, yeah, I belong right with all these other athletes. But my whole college career, I still felt like I do not belong here. These people are so much better than me. And to be honest, that really hindered my performance as a collegiate athlete. So it's something that I have always struggled with, still struggle with, same as Courtney as a grad student and in so many different aspects of life. So I'm really happy that Courtney and I are able to kind of talk about this with you and learn about some ways to maybe combat this, different aspects of what really goes into that feeling of having imposter syndrome. So yeah, thank you all for being here today.
On that note, with us sharing that, I know people put thumbs up, but I wanted to open it up and see if anyone is interested in sharing their experience with feeling like someone's going to discover you.
We also have something in the chat, Courtney.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, I see what you said, and I hope I say your name right, Yamelet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you are right on time. We're about to jump into conversation around ethnic groups, identities, and how that really ties into imposter syndrome and talking about racial imposter syndrome. And that's a very real thing. So thank you so much for kind of bringing that conversation up, because we're about to start talking about it. So to define imposter syndrome from Merriam-Webster, imposter syndrome, a noun, the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort or skills. So no matter how much studying, interviews, acceptance into jobs that you have deserved and done and rightfully achieved, you still feel like, I don't belong here. This is not me. Yes. So we're kind of going to jump into this conversation and kind of brushing the topic of identities and bringing that into our conversation with a short activity. So what if you have a piece of paper next to you, if you don't, if you have just your phone and what you want to jot things down in your notes, if you can think of 10 statements to write down, all of them starting with I am and a noun. Each statement should reflect a part of your identity, something that is truly essential to who you are as a person or how you view the world around you. To give you some examples, so some of the statements you write down may reflect attributes that you cannot change about yourself. For instance, I am a woman, I am right-handed, things that are just, they're matter of fact. Other statements may reflect kind of particular values that you choose to embrace. So I am a Christian, I am a Democrat, I am an animal lover, things like that, that you are choosing to have that as an identity. And then lastly, other statements might reflect roles that you value playing in your personal and professional life or as your student life. So maybe I am a lab manager. I am a musician. I am an introvert, something like that. So if you just take a few minutes to jot down those statements of those identities, and yeah, so I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we will jump back kind of to tap into that. And if anyone needs me to repeat anything, I'm happy to. You can either write in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm happy to repeat anything. So as you're writing these statements down, and again, if you don't make it to 10, that's okay. I want you to try, and it might be kind of hard, to rank these statements. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, rank them from most central to your identity to least central of your identity. Or if that's too hard, then you can just try to kind of divide them into rough groups. But if you can, try to rank them to most central to who I am and what I value to kind of not as important, but still part of who you are. So I'm curious if anyone is kind of willing to share. If not, that's okay too. Just what was at the top of your list? And when you think about who you are, so to give you an example, it's easier to explain with an example. So say the identity that you most identify with is being a musician, for example. So what was at the top of your list? Did it have anything to do with being a musician? And if not, how far down the list was it related to something musician related? Did you even have any statements that are related to your identity as a musician? This is all, for example, make it who you are. So is there anything that kind of conflict with your idea of what a musician is supposed to be? And my whole point of trying to get you all to think of this is just that imposter syndrome really has everything to do with identity. And if you don't see yourself as the musician, the scientist, the friend, whatever it may be, then you're always going to feel like an imposter no matter how much success you have in that field. And that kind of taps into what I was saying before. As an athlete, I had all of these successes coming up to it, but when I was actually in it, I never felt successful in that position because I never truly saw myself as a Division I athlete. So I'm curious if any of you would kind of be willing to share what was at the top of your list, and I challenge you to share, is that what was at your top of the list, did that line up with what you wanted it to be, if that makes sense? Does that make sense, Courtney?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
So I could share if that's okay.
Sure.
The first 3 or 4 things that I had on my list were I am artistic, I am an avid reader, I am a writer, and I am right-handed. So I guess those are like all the things that I was reflecting upon. And I would say that those are a lot of things that I put a lot of my time and effort into just because I need some sort of outlet for my energy. So that generally comes into something artistic or needing to read or write something. So I definitely would say that I do identify with doing those things, but like seeing them as myself, I don't necessarily see that connection, but I'm sure that we'll get into that. Excited to
Yeah.
hear this.
No, thank you so much for sharing, Ash. And it, like, from hearing all those things, it sounds like you are a creative. You are a creative person, love to create and be a part of that process. So it's interesting that you say maybe sometimes, even though it's something you identify with, that maybe you don't like see it in that way either. So yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. And we're definitely going to get into that a little bit later on.
Something that I think is interesting about that, just knowing you, Ash, is that connects to marketing, being creative and doing that. And that you, it sounds like you're in a field where those top 4 of the things that you identify with, you can utilize. So that can be helpful for you in actually seeing yourself there and knowing that you belong there.
Yeah, that's a very interesting connection to like the field that I'm trying to go into, because I actually love to mock up my own presentations and everything since I like to do it all. So I definitely see that connection. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And like what Natasha talked about is you can think of yourself being an imposter in different situations, whether it's work, whether it's being a friend, whether it's being a good partner. There's a lot of different situations where you can find yourself being an imposter. But no matter what those situations are, if you don't see yourself as identifying as a good partner, or identifying as the musician, for example, if that's the method or the profession that you're trying to reach, if you don't see yourself as core of your identity being whatever you're working with, then you will feel like an imposter. And that can kind of show you a strategy for how to combat that, is figuring out how to really see yourself as whatever you're trying to battle the imposter syndrome with.
Yeah. So if no one else is willing to share, totally okay. I encourage you just kind of to keep that little nugget in the back of your mind as we're going through this presentation of why am I feeling this way? Do I belong in these situations? Which most likely, yes, you do. And kind of why am I feeling this way? So if you want to move along, Courtney. So as we kind of touched on earlier, how do you think that identity, so these identities that we either jotted down or those kind of deeper identities of ethnicity, race, gender, sexuality, all of those things that are such a crucial part of our identities, how do those factors kind of play a role in imposter syndrome? If anyone has initial thoughts that they just want to throw out there, just so we can kind of get an idea of what people are feeling. I saw a hand. Where'd you go?
Nadine,
Yes.
if you can go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
I was thinking maybe like representation being a thing, like if you identify as Latino or Latina, but no one in your field is Latino or Latina, then you're going to not feel like you belong there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, representation is huge. If you can't see other people who share those identities with you accomplishing the field or whatever it is, then that'll be a question of, do I belong there?
I would have went along the same lines also, just like we are naturally social creatures. So we want to connect and we want to feel a part of something. So naturally we would want to try to fit in, right? Like Nadine said. So I think just trying to pull other people's identities and try to make them yours is something that you do just to try to connect in that space and with those people. So that's how I think, you know, your personal identity and others' identities play a role in imposter syndrome.
Yeah, no, I think those are, go ahead, Courtney, you were going to say something.
Oh, it's okay. Well, I was going to say, especially, actually, the train of thought was gone. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to kind of say, no, that's exactly kind of what we're going on is so many times, unfortunately, there's not the necessary representation in all these fields that our students are a part of, that we are a part of. And it's hard not to have that thought of kind of like, oh crap, like, am I supposed to be here? Like, do I belong here? Have I studied the right things? Do I have the same background that everyone else has? Am I going to be valued here? At least for me, all of those questions come kind of spiraling in my head when I don't see myself in the people that are in this room. And it's such a frustrating thing to be a part of, but it's so important for us to acknowledge that thought, and B, kind of combat it with another thought of, no, I do belong here. And so that is what we're kind of going to hear from our girl, Miss Michelle Obama. Hopefully you all enjoy her as much as we do. She has it's a conversation that she has on this topic, and I think she does a really great job of bringing in that racial and gender piece. So we're just going to kind of watch this short snippet.
I did remember my thought, so I'll say that one right before we start her. But especially for some underrepresented identities, and depending on the individual and the space that you're in, they may have been trying to blend in to be able to reach a certain level. Maybe they're trying to blend into whiteness because the field is full of white people. And then that extra feeling of I don't belong here can be exacerbated from not having representation and not seeing people there. So let's hear Michelle. She's about it much better than I can.
Mrs. Obama, could we quickly touch on imposter syndrome? Because I know it's something you have spoken a little bit about. There was a question from one of our leaders from Indonesia, feeling you're not good enough.
Yeah. How many people, this imposter syndrome, does everybody know what we're talking about when we say imposter? It's like,
I don't really know that term.
Well, particularly for minorities, you know, there's this feeling like because you've been told that you're not good enough, that when you're in a room, you're wondering, well, how did I get here if I've been told I'm not good enough? Women feel it oftentimes because society says you shouldn't be doing that, right? So you feel like an imposter in your own life. You feel like, especially if you've achieved success or you're in rooms that you're not supposed to be in because society has told you that, you think maybe somebody's going to discover that I shouldn't be here, right? That's imposter syndrome. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
So what I tell people is, okay, you know, and all I can do is tell you this because imposter syndrome it's a thing in your head. And, you know, it's just like self-confidence. It's just like, you know, it's like any internal characteristic. Much of it is what you practice telling yourself, you know, and if you've heard that you're not good enough, that's what you're practicing. I'm just here to tell you it is not true. You wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't belong here. And I also have the advantage of, and I say this not with any level of arrogance or lack of humility, but I have been at so many powerful tables now, right? I've been at, you know, I've worked in every sector. I've been a lawyer at a big law firm. I've worked at an academic university, been associate dean. I've been the vice president in community development at a hospital. I've been, I run a nonprofit organization. I've worked in the government. I worked with the mayor in the city of Chicago. I worked in the Department of Planning and Development. I was First Lady of the United States of America. I've seen these seats. I've served on corporate boards. I've done it, not all, but I've done a lot. And I'm just telling you, there are a lot of people who don't belong there. And every table, I thought it was me. And after a little bit, I was like, nope, it's him. It's this guy who's sitting here talking
But they
all
act
the time.
so well. They act like they belong.
That's because they've been told they belong there. They don't. But there's a presumption. That's what I'm saying. It's in his head too. He's like, I belong here. And I'm like, no, you don't. So all I can tell you is that the person sitting next to you was told, based on nothing, that he belongs there. And you were told that you weren't. Both things are wrong, oftentimes. So what I had to learn to do for myself was age helps you with imposter syndrome. So I'm 55 now, and I've seen it. I've been waiting to be as bad as people told me I would be, I've been waiting for when I was going to fall and mess up and fail. I've been waiting because that's what they said. I didn't belong at Princeton, right? I applied to Princeton University. My college counselor said, that's school's too much for you. Well, I applied anyway. I got in. I was waiting for it to be hard and for everybody else to be so much smarter. They weren't. They weren't. They were just told that they belong there. Same thing was true when I applied to Harvard Law School. Maybe I shouldn't be there. Got there, nope. They're not any smarter than me. So with all the practice of just going into the room that you weren't supposed to be in and being there and occupying those seats and just doing you and knowing that your thoughts are just as relevant, your experiences are just as important, your insight is just as valuable, so that you will share it and use it and practice being there. That's the work you have to do if you feel like an imposter, because he isn't giving up his seat easily. He isn't going to just say, oh, I understand you don't feel like you belong here. Well, let me make room for you and sit you down and tell you the things you need to hear. They're not going to do that for you, because a lot of times they don't even want you there, even when they need you there. So you can't count on somebody else giving you the self-confidence. That's not how we work, And that's why you all are important, because you're not going to do that for some kid in your life. You're going to make sure that they never feel like an imposter. You're going to help them practice a different set of messages so they aren't sitting here wondering where they belong in places where we need them. We need women and diverse minds and people who think differently and have different religious beliefs, because truth and the right answer comes from diversity of experiences. You're needed at those tables. So you can't sit there wondering whether you belong, because you'll waste your time in those seats and you'll hold your voice back and you won't be able to make change because you're waiting for somebody to tell you that you belong. I'm telling you, you belong. Practice a different set of messages.
Thank you for saying that. So important.
Wow, just great. Don't we love her? So I think that was a really great segue into our next. We just have a few questions that we kind of want to jump into to kind of just dive into this a little bit more and talk about this feeling of imposter syndrome that's so closely tied to our identity. And Michelle Obama so eloquently tied it to her identity of being a woman. But there's so many other factors that feel the same way, of being Latino, Latina, a Black American, Asian American, Muslim, any of those things. You feel that there are stereotypes oftentimes that are attached to those identities that it's one more barrier that you kind of put upon yourself. So just kind of to like open up here's some questions here. How does gender identity play a role in imposter syndrome? Have you ever felt like you needed to fit the mold of your ethnic identity, but maybe you don't fit into it? How do different learning and working styles and conflict management styles play into imposter syndrome? So these are all different aspects of identity. So yeah, just curious on everybody's thoughts on any of those questions. If you have any just gut reactions to that video, I'd love to hear any thoughts. Yes, Holly.
My biggest thing from that is like, it got me thinking about the recent events and the recent like rise in Asian hate crimes, and it kind of made me feel upset, and it made me feel like I'll be safer back being in China or in Vietnam. But then again, because in my 4 years ago when I went back to Vietnam, I didn't even feel like I belong there because I'm half Chinese and half Vietnamese. And then one of my mom's friends said like a derogatory term in Vietnamese to me. So I'm stuck in the middle ground and I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be at. And then I don't fall into the stereotypical Asian stereotype either, because down at UC Denver, like on campus when I used to meet up, a lot of the Asian students that went there, they are very different from what I am. And then it's like I didn't feel like I belong in that group. And then just based on growing up in Mount Bello and like Mount Bello, Green Valley area, I definitely talk different. And yeah, it's just, I don't know where I'm supposed to be at, but I'm shaped by the environment that I grew up in. But
yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that, Holly. I think that's a really important and kind of necessary perspective. I know I've kind of felt it in my own life. So my mom is Latina. My mom is from the Dominican Republic, and my dad is from Richmond, Virginia. And I am very white presenting. So in my experience, I've kind of felt like this in between of I don't belong in that Latina culture, but I still want to identify. I love the music. I love the culture. But I also feel like I'm in this middle ground that you mentioned. And I think for me, it's been helpful to remind myself of the uniqueness that I have and the uniqueness that you have, Holly, and how you bring two cultures that are so great, and the culture of where you grew up in Montbello. All of those things make this beautiful, amazing Holly. And there's no other person that's like that in a setting that you will go into. And Danby, I was just about to tap you because I imagine that you might have similar experiences. But yeah, it's such a hard place to be in that middle ground, and it can be so defeating when you're in these situations, whether it's on campus or at a restaurant, at wherever it may be, but on campus, when we're on campus. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and it's something that just kind of always hits your mind of like, why don't I feel like I belong? Why do these people act differently than me? And I don't know if I have like the right answer, but just know that like I understand that kind of discomfort of being in that middle ground. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, if I could say something real quick, Holly, I totally understand where you're coming from. I myself am also half Vietnamese, half white, European, whatever you want to call it. And I think what really helps is finding those people that really accept you for who you are instead of, just picking you apart for your differences. And once you find a niche or those people that help you realize like how important you actually are, how special you actually are, you're going to be able to use those the bad feelings that you've ever had and use it to help empower you and find your purpose or whatever you want to be doing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I completely understand how you feel.
What all of you have talked about is mixed identity experiences and how that has been complicated. And thank you, all three of you, for sharing your stories there. And I think this is just a glimpse of how people can representationally, culturally, not feel like they belong. And especially when we are here at college with the purpose trying to be to have you be prepared to be a leader out in the world, that you all are especially needed in spaces where you don't feel like you belong. Because like Michelle Obama said, in terms of the work, like in what's going on, like you do belong. Like your voice is needed, and you, in whatever profession, entrepreneurial, or whatever career-wise you want to do with your life, you belong there. And thank you all for sharing the complications with how identity can be a barrier to that feeling. Did anyone else want to share, or Natasha, go ahead. But did anyone else want to share for any of these other questions?
I was just gonna, because we haven't really touched on that last question of learning and working in conflict management styles, and how that kind of can affect it. And I know I keep giving them examples because I feel imposter syndrome all the time. So I'm actively working through this with all of you. So I was an English major in undergrad, and I am the slowest reader. I am not the best writer, but I was an English major surrounded by all of these brilliant minds. And I always struggled with that it always took me a little bit longer to get through a chapter. It took me longer to kind of analyze a chapter, as English majors do, and find